So I wanted to talk real briefly about what the recent breakup between Klay Thompson and Meg the Stallion reveals about men and women today and their understanding of relationships, their understanding of what women value and ultimately what men value. Because the interesting thing about this particular breakup, I've seen a lot of women who are mad, upset, concerned, in some ways confused, talking about Klay Thompson fumbled the bag and, just fumbled Meg the Stallion. And I addressed this in a previous video, but there's a lot of ladies I think who are somewhat blindsided by this breakup, not fully understanding what's going on or why somebody like Klay Thompson would let her go. Now, on the flip side, what I've noticed is the general perception that men have is completely different. A lot of men were looking at this situation as a fling. They were kind of looking at Klay Thompson a little bit sideways. They're being like, okay, bro, you're just having just for fun only. You know what I mean? Like you're just a phase or this is just a situationship. But most men that I have heard talking about their relationship, even when they were dating, weren't taking any of it seriously. They were just kind of waiting for things to fall apart. And I've noticed the general perception that I saw between men and women, to me, is a larger reflection on what's going on in today's dating market. And that's what I find so fascinating about these celebrity relationships. I always take celebrity relationships with a grain of salt because we never know what's happening outside of Instagram and outside of whatever TikTok reels or whatever production they have. But what these relationships do is they reveal beliefs, thought, just expectations, mindsets that are happening in today's dating market. And what we see is that there is still a general misunderstanding, I believe, that some ladies have in particular about what men actually desire and want. And in certain senses, and in a certain sense, it may just come down to the fact that ladies just don't really care. Like there's some ladies who ultimately don't care what men want, even if they desire to be with a man, and even if they desire to date a man, yet and still they may not actually want to take the time and energy to find out what men value. So there is some of that. But then I also think to a certain extent, there's just a lot of ignorance because the way social media works is it's very easy to get caught in silos. And it's very easy to get caught in listening to people that you only agree with all the time. And all they do is reinforce what you believe. But the problem with that is that they mean that you're not always challenged to see things the way another person is. And when it comes to women, when it comes to dating and mating, there is no shortage of echo chambers where we can just be reinforced in what we believe. But there's not always places where you see that honest exchange between this is what men like, this is what women like, generally speaking, this is what healthy relationships look like. So you have a hard time finding that. But here are some of the main distinctions I saw between how women were perceiving this relationship and how men were perceiving this relationship, right? So what I noticed is a lot of women still believe that a lady's success in her career, her ability to get the bag, her baddie aesthetic on stage, and maybe even the fact that she just looks the part, that somehow translates into her being a catch in a long-term relationship and maybe even being wifey material for a high-value man. And by high value, I mean a man that is successful financially, ideally has the status, has the height, has the money, has the career. These are all things that Klay Thompson, he checked those boxes. These are things that women, generally speaking, across the board, across races, across ethnicity, and across religious affiliation, value, okay? A man like that, they may not understand that the things that they value as ladies, such as a woman's ability to get the bag, ability to be a boss babe, to twerk, to go hang out with her friends, to have a little bit of attitude or whatever, to have sass, they may not always understand that that's not cute to men. Like that's not necessarily what men value. That may be what women value. Women may value that for their own personal reasons. When it comes down to, okay, so how is that going to translate into a woman actually being a long-term, right? An actual wifey material? There's no connection. See, and the thing about it also is one of the things that ladies continue to try to push against is this idea that having a high body count doesn't and will not necessarily undermine your relationship prospect. And, Meg the Stallion, her relationship history has been very open and it's been very long and it's been very plentiful. She's been with a lot of different dudes that we know about. As attractive as she is, and with the amount of successful, high profile men that she's been with, God only knows the men that we don't know about. But what I'm saying is women may look at that and see that as like, okay, she's had a lot of experience. she's been able to grow and learn and evolve, and she's getting stronger on her healing journeys. So women are going to look at all those previous relationships and see that as a woman's, evolvement, a coming to a maturity process. Men, on the other hand, are going to look at a woman who's been with a lot of different dudes, had a lot of different bodies, and put her in the category of community property. And so the reason that's important is because, when women were looking at Meg Thee Stallion getting with this particular individual, they're like, oh man, this is a level up. She's prepared herself. She's gone through all these different things. She's always gone through all these different toxic relationships. Now she's being treated nice. And so to a certain extent, it was like, okay, she's made it. Like, we hope this works out. It seems like she's had to pass through all these frogs to get to her Prince Charming. Men, on the other hand, were looking at the situation and saying, hey, this lady is community property, and we're just going to see how long he's going to ride this out until he kind of decides to move on. What I'm trying to articulate is that men and women inherently value different things. They do. Women are the ones that value money, status. Women are the ones that actually value experience in men, right? There are women who will see a man who's had a lot of bodies, and while they may want that man to be faithful to her, something intrinsically in her says, okay, well, if this man has been desired by all these other different women, then therefore there must be something good and unique about him. There must be something valuable about him. And so I want to claim him for myself. And so a woman is going to want to get with a man that other ladies find desirable. Again, this is generally speaking. I'm not saying this is every particular case, but generally speaking, women are going to want to get with men that other ladies find desirable. This is why there are some women out there who will target married men, or they will target a man who has a ring on his finger or who's in a relationship, because they get off on that. On the other hand, men, not necessarily, right? Like, from a man's point of view, okay, if this is another man's woman, they're looking at it as like, okay, that's his territory, that's his domain. Like, I don't necessarily need to go into that. And so they're not looking at it the same way. If anything, they're looking at it like, okay, that guy's thing over here, I want my woman. That's that guy's woman, right? And so if a woman, if she's been with a whole bunch of different dudes, then for him, it's no longer sacred. It's no longer like, okay, this is my woman that I have access to. This woman is open for anybody. And in that regard, a man may not see it as special because it's not sacred to him. It's not unique for him. It's not something that only he can access. That in and of itself exposes a big difference between how men and women generally value each other. And of course, again, I'm speaking in generalities. I'm not saying this is always the case for every single person, but there is a big reason you see the way men react into this story and the way women react into the story are completely different. And even if we look at some of the comments here, right? Like, I wanted to look at some of the comments that kind of reflect this. If you look at this one right here, it says, the idea that this industry passed around was going to get a happily ever after is delusional, right? So this man basically reiterating what I said is, men might look at Meg Thee Stallion and her history, and some may come to the conclusion she's community property. They use terms like pass around. I know for some women this might be triggering and you may not agree with this, but I'm just trying to articulate you how guys see it. Don't shoot the messenger. This one said, everyone is laughing at Meg, run Klay run. This one says, Meg Thee Stallion was just recreational fun. She thought she had the bag, she found out she just got had, right? And so again, like I said, there are plenty of men out there who are, to a certain extent, they're laughing at this, or they're just completely unsurprised, because from the way that they see and the way that they perceive it, already knew that it was only a matter of time before it didn't go anywhere, because men put ladies in a category. They put ladies in a category of, okay, this is potential wifey, this is a woman who could actually lead to something, or this is just for recreational use only. This is just a pass around. This is just a situation. Like, men will easily put ladies in categories. Now, they may not necessarily say it and articulate it, and some dudes may be comfortable being in long-term situationships for a week, for a month, even for years if he ends up getting his wants met. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he is seeing it the same way that the ladies are. That's the thing that we don't always understand. Just because a man is going to give a woman, sex or sexual access, different things, still doesn't mean that he sees her as wifey material. Still doesn't mean that he sees her as long-term. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, with the quote high value men, unquote, the men that have the status, the money, the image, all of that, many of those men still want to be with a woman that they believe is exclusive to them. Most guys don't want to be with a woman that has a reputation of being a pass around or having community property. Most guys. Again, there's still going to be some exceptions, right? You had that one song back in the day that was about a dude talking about he was in love with a stripper. Of course, there are dudes out there who they really don't care. But I think if we're talking a general rule, and particularly men who are high value, and especially when you leave the athlete and entertainer, because they operate in a whole different paradigm. When you enter the real world, world and you're dealing with high value men who are not athletes and entertainers, but they're, corporate world, they're corporate spaces, they're white collar, they're professionals. In that world in particular, those men in particular aren't necessarily going out of their way to be around with a woman that's considered a community property. And so that's just reality. Now, with that said, I understand there's some women, they have their whole phase, they do things that they regret, and they turn around. They generally try to turn the life around. They generally try to get better. Doesn't mean that you still can't find somebody to love you, right? I believe there's somebody for everybody at any level. I truly believe that. But it is just to be aware that choices do have consequences. And I think ultimately to just value your body, but then also be in acceptance on how a lot of men see stuff. Yeah, you're gonna see good men who end up with a reformed OnlyFans model. Yeah, you're gonna see good men out there who end up with a girl who was a pass around who, gave her life to God or so. But like that happens. That happens. I'm just saying I wouldn't count on that. Like I certainly would, if I was a woman, I wouldn't go out of my way to just be a pass around and you're gonna have a whole phase and then think you're gonna settle down one day with a Russell Wilson. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. And I think it's just good to understand, generally speaking, what men value. And as I mentioned before, these are things that are cross-race, cross-cultural, cross-religion, right? You can get you a man that doesn't claim any particular spiritual practice and still wants to be with a woman, generally speaking, that he feels like is not community property. You can go with a man of God who's in church and who's serving faithfully under a ministry and doing different things. He's waiting on his wife, and he is also likely not going to want to be with a woman who it has a reputation of being community property. Like there are just certain things that are across the board. Same with just like women, like whether a woman is broke on the street or whether she is, a successful woman, most women still want to be with a man that is considered successful, desirable. Most women want to date hypergamously if they can. Like there are just certain things out the gate that are inherent and biological, no matter your race, no matter your religious or your spiritual orientation, no matter any of those things, there's just certain things that are biological desires. So to me, there are just certain things about men and women that it just is what it is. Like it doesn't really change. It doesn't really change. But anyways, y'all, that's what I have about this whole thing. What are your thoughts on this whole topic? Let me know down in the comment section. Thank you so much for listening if you've gotten this far, and we'll talk later, okay? Bye.